Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking Pictures, where we explore people's love of film. Today, we're going to be talking about this year's Best Picture Oscar nominees. Joining me today will be a friend of mine who is probably even more into the Academy Awards than I am. He is also a bona fide movie buff. Please welcome my friend Blake. Blake, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim. I'm excited to talk about the Oscars this year, that's for sure. More so than I have been in recent years, to be quite honest.
When did you first take notice of the Oscars?
Well, I've been a movie lover my whole life, but I really started to pay attention to the Oscars probably when I was a freshman in college. That was when I started to have access to what I would call better cinematic programming. I went to the University of Illinois where Roger Ebert hosted his, back then it was called the Overlooked Film Festival. Now it's just known as Ebert Fest. And that sort of opened my eyes to films that I otherwise would not have seen. And then come Oscar time the following year, because the festival always took place in around April, I felt going into my sophomore year of college a little more attuned to what quality cinema was. And when it came to the Oscars, I felt like, well, hey, if that's the highest benchmark that Hollywood offers in terms of awarding films for their quality, then maybe I should pay a little more attention. And so ever since then, I've just been cued in, I guess, or keyed in to the types of films that might get nominated or the ones that I hope would get nominated, and certain categories that I prefer over others. And Best Picture just always ends up being the easiest one to talk about because you can just as easily say, go see those films and then have great talking points to discuss each one and their merits.
People have this interpretation of the Oscars as sometimes being a bit flawed. They can neglect certain types of films, like genre films. People sometimes say it's not really about what's the best movie, it's what's the most popular movie or what's the most campaigned for movie. There's also the issue of Oscar bait movies, where people say it's just a movie that's just there because they wanted to win an Oscar. What do you think of all those problems? Do you think that they are issues?
I think they are, but I think it depends on the year, to be quite honest with you. For example, this year, I think all the films in this category are solid contenders for being known as one of the best pictures of 2016 in this case. But some years I do feel like there's those, it feels like this was kind of a given, or it was Oscar baiting, or it was shoved in. I think some years they're better, some years they're worse. And since I believe it was 2009 when they changed over and started going to up to 10 nominees in the category of Best Picture, that certainly diversified the pot, so to speak. You could definitely have more independent films getting recognized as long as they can meet the Academy's criteria. Films like musicals, maybe even sci-fi, action. I feel like going the distance and going the full 10, which is how things used to be, for those that may not know, up to about the 40s, that was the number of nominees in that category, were about 10 nominees every year. Now, back then, they made way more movies per year. But in the present, I think it is offering up a chance for us to see many different types of films that otherwise we wouldn't. You know, in this case, we're able to maybe see a festival darling that hit it big at Sundance the year before and sort of rode this train of success through the festival circuit and then somehow got a good distribution deal. And now guess what? It really is an honest contender. You might also have a film like, say, La La Land, you know, which is a very well-produced musical that it separates itself from the rest of the pack in terms of the other 8 nominees in the category. And then you have Arrival, which is a sci-fi film, and I think a true sci-fi film. So, I mean, to name each one, and I know we're going to go through each one, but to kind of, you know, give you just that little brief glance, you've already got a diverse offering of types of films that you could see in the category, and I think that's a positive thing. But some years it's better than others, and I'm hoping that if this year is a benchmark for years to come, I think we're going to be in a pretty good spot as far as moviegoers, but also the Academy will be in terms of upping its credibility, because it's had some struggles in the last few years of battling its credibility, how broken the old archaic system is, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hopeful, given the state of the Academy's union, so to speak.
I know a lot of people complain about well, right now the rule is 5 to 10 Best Picture nominees, depending on certain criteria. If it's met, you have somewhere between 5 and 10. I know a lot of people are kind of down on that idea of having more than 5, but you seem to be kind of cautiously optimistic about it, that it can actually be a good thing, depending on the situation.
I'm going to be honest with you. Like, there have been a couple of years since 2009 when they made this big change where I felt like we didn't need to have 8, 9, 10 nominees. I think they could have stopped at maybe 6 and it would have been a solid category, a better category, you know, a better Best Picture category. But they're kind of hell bent on keeping it this maybe a little bit of a higher total. You know, it's been, I think, 8 one year, 9 several others, and then 10 a couple of years, like since they made the change. But I would say, and I think this is why I'm hopeful, I would say that if there were only truly 5 Best Picture contenders, the Academy would see fit to only nominate those 5 pictures. And if they did, then I would completely say, look, yeah, you could have 5 to 10, no problem. But don't make it so that if you say it can be 5 to 10, that it has to be in the upwards level of near 10. Because what happens when you do nominate a full 10, say 1 year, and you got 4 films that have no business being in that category? They just have no chance. I mean, they're good films in their own right, or great performance, or a great script, or maybe the best director directed it. But that doesn't mean it's the best picture, because best picture, it's the all-encompassing category. It's the thing that made this film be the standout film of the year that this Academy chooses to recognize as best. I think it could be a pool of 5. I think it could be a pool of 10. It just depends on the year. And we don't really have a huge sample size of years yet to really dictate, I think, whether or not this is a good or a bad thing. I think we're coming up on that. And I think some years have definitely been better than others. And those years I have no beef, but some years I know I'm going to be mad because there's other films that get forgotten. And even if you do a full 10, what if they become very linear in their pack of films? And there's some indie film out there that really just every critic loves it, every moviegoer who saw it loved it. It made decent money, it got a good distribution deal, but I don't know, they just didn't go for your consideration. And therefore, they're not counted by the Academy at all. Maybe the criteria needs to be revisited. But I think there's bigger issues than just the Best Picture category. And that's a rabbit hole that I could go down. I don't like getting too bent out of shape about the Oscars, but I do like being able to criticize things that I feel deserve to be criticized. But this year, again, these nominees I feel pretty solid about. And I'm looking forward actually to somebody at the Oscar party I go to, or wherever I am, telling me that there was a movie I might have missed. That's another thing I love, because then I go out and find that movie and I just say skip all the rest of this stuff. I want to go see that now. And that's one of the upsides of the way the Academy works. They're bringing awareness now to more films that in past years they would have ignored. And I don't think that that's a negative thing at all.
Okay, so let's move into the Best Picture nominees. I think the best way to do this is just to do them alphabetically. So we're going to start with Arrival. Blake, could you tell us what that film is about?
Arrival is a science fiction film that is what I would call true science fiction. It's not an action film. It is about humanity's first contact on a global scale. Multiple spacecraft of sorts land and hover above Earth's surface and await humanity's contact with this species. And in the process, you're introduced to a character played by Amy Adams, who is a linguistics professor who speaks many languages, both dead languages and active languages around the world. And she's considered like the foremost expert on how to construct and analyze and learn language. And so the military wants her to be the point person in trying to establish some form of communication with this new alien species. So the film is very cerebral because it doesn't really go into this whole, the whole world's going to fall apart and everyone's going to die. But Earth has its paranoia about that. And so there's very high stakes. It's very suspense driven. It's very intellectually driven because of the academic sense of how to build a working language between two species that have no sense of how to communicate with each other, but both have extreme intelligence. And she's supported by Jeremy Renner in this, who I'm a big fan of. I really am. But at times in the beginning of the film, I didn't know if he was the right guy for this part. So we're going to have to talk about that. But for the most part, that's the film. At its core, it's about trying to find a way to communicate between two species that have never coexisted. And there's fear, there's paranoia, there's some excitement, and there's a lot of cerebral elements, some nonlinear storytelling as well that makes it quite interesting and attention grabbing, despite the fact that it's not an action sci-fi film.
It is very intellectual, and there are suggestions of action at certain points in the film, but you never really get to see them, but you're never missing them, really. Out of the Best Picture nominees this year, it's probably one of the best scripts, if not maybe the best script of bunch.
The way Independence Day Resurgence had very little brain and all about the action and the spectacle and the extreme visuals, this film is very much grounded in its reality and actually is portrayed in a plausible manner if we were to be visited by intergalactic aliens. And it doesn't try to camp itself up in any way. I agree that it's one of the best written films of the year. And not just because these are great characters, I also think it's because of the way the story is woven together. And it is really one of those things that you have to see the film because I really don't want to spoil it. I think it is a rewarding film for people who are attentive viewers for this type of cinema. If you want to go in and really be thinking, this is a good movie to go watch. And it feels like a great mystery novel. There's clues and hints and little things. And at times you want to make sure that you're thinking, wait a minute, didn't? And then all of a sudden it moves into another layer. The film unfolds a very strong narrative from beginning to end. And you end up really caring about these characters. I feel right now this was a great sci-fi film to see in 2016, but also I don't think I've seen a sci-fi film like this in a very long time. I mean, this kind of falls in that category of like 2001. This falls into that category as far as science fiction goes, because it doesn't just immediately jump to some kind of easy get to make people want to watch it. It wants to reward the person who pays attention to it from start to finish, which I think is its biggest strength.
Anytime it might have devolved into something lesser than its potential, it just maintains its quality throughout the whole thing and just really brings up some stuff that I don't think really has been talked about. It is really about communication and the power of communication and the power of coming together as really a planet and a race. In that sense, I don't think it was meant to be topical, but it kind of became accidentally topical. You mentioned Jeremy Renner being a bit of a problem.
Well, okay, I want to preface all of this by saying Jeremy Renner is an outstanding actor. I'm a huge proponent of his work in The Hurt Locker. I think he brings a really cool edge to the Mission Impossible films. I think that when you dig down deep and realize he's done some character work, it's all been very good. I mean, he did a film where he played Jeffrey Dahmer, and he was frightening in the natural way he played this character, who was a real person and a serial killer and all of these things. But in this film, when I first met the character, I felt like there could have been an easier sell with an actor who can play geeky just a little bit better. But then as the film went on, I became very accepting of him in this role, portraying this character, and I was backing him up just as much as I was Amy Adams' character.
When you first see him, he is a bit worrying because they do the whole he's wearing glasses thing, so obviously he's smart and all that stuff. But he has a great understated charisma about him that he's almost effortlessly, I think, likable.
I would agree with that.
Without
Yeah.
going overboard with it. He can be funny. You see that a little bit in this film where he is not, I don't want to say he's not a comic relief, but at certain points he does bring some levity to the situation. So yeah, I loved him in this film. He was really maybe an odd choice, but I think a really good choice.
I really enjoyed watching this film, and I was lucky to see it in a theater that was quite packed, and the reaction was quite overwhelmingly positive. And it was a diverse offering of age groups. There were older couples there, there were younger people there were people who looked like, they were middle-aged. There was applause at the end of it. I kind of knew the film was special just based on, it didn't just win me over, it won the audience over. It would probably end up on my top 10 for sure, if I were just making a list of the top 10 films I saw in 2016.
Okay, so I think we can move on to Fences. It's starring Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, based off an incredibly acclaimed play from 1980-something. But it won tons of Tonys at the time. It won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. Then they revived it, and Denzel Washington and Viola Davis play the parts that they play in the film. Denzel Washington directed the show. He's directing the movie as well. It takes place in I think it's 1956 or 1957, Pittsburgh. It's about a sanitation worker played by Denzel Washington who's trying to kind of move up a little bit in his job. He would like to be a driver of one of the trucks, and then his wife, played by Viola Davis, is kind of a stay-at-home wife, and it is very much a character-driven movie. It's not a plot-driven movie. You're really just kind of following the lives of Washington and Davis. Washington's character, he used to play baseball. He used to be, from what we're told, he used to be pretty good, but he was a bit older when he did it, and because of the time it didn't quite work out for him, but he holds a lot of resentment for not being able to do that, and he tends to take it out on kind of just life and his family, especially his son, who wants to play football and make something of his life through that. It's a very interesting film because at times it can be funny, and at times it can be very dramatic, it can be very dark. At certain points of the film, certain secrets are revealed that very much change the lives of the characters. What did you think of it?
Well, this is one of my favorite films of the year. I'm a big theater junkie, and I was familiar with Fences, the play, before going to see the film. And I was excited because I had seen clips of Denzel and Viola playing this when they did the revival, and I believe it was 2010 or something on the Tonys. I was just kind of truly incensed. I was like, holy crap, those performances look so good. Like, if I could buy a ticket and go to New York and see some shows right now, this would be one of the top shows I would go see. And the overall film adaptation, though, which is a bit of a of a really unique thing, I think, because you were able to take what was the revival of a play and put the exact same actors for the principal roles, all in the same roles. The production design and aesthetic pretty much matched the way that the play's set design was constructed. And it's tough because plays being adapted can not be enjoyable cinematic experiences for audiences. I can agree with anyone who would say that. However, this one I felt came right out of the gate with great dialogue. Snap the fingers, follow the pace. It was like watching an incredible jazz quartet just play every kind of song possible somehow over the course of 2 hours. Like you said, there's elements of humor, there's some dark underbelly secrets, there's a high amount of volatile relationships in this film, and the emotional spectrum that the film manages to cover in such a short span of time is riveting in a lot of ways. And I could not have been more impressed with Viola Davis's performance. I feel Denzel, both here as an actor and a director, did this play a great service in getting it a proper cinematic treatment. And I'm not saying the film just wrote on this. I feel it was a great artistic expression of this great written work. The Oscars that this film is going to take home are going to be Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress. I think it's silly that Viola is Best Supporting Actress given her amount of screen time and the gravity she has in the film. But I do think that the acting is what makes this film work. It is really what makes it work, makes it sing, makes it have an impact.
In terms of the acting, while I'll admit I was not a fan of this film, I know you spoke to the dialogue of it, and I could see why a lot of people would like the dialogue. It is a very natural dialogue in a way that I know a lot of people praise Quentin Tarantino's dialogue. Tarantino films and this film are very dialogue-heavy films. While I am totally fine with it being a dialogue-driven film, I think in this case, they maybe could have handled it a bit differently. I was very worn out by the film. There was just a lot of dialogue. It just went on and 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 on. You would get a break for 5 seconds, then you would get more dialogue, more dialogue, more dialogue, and it just got very, very exhausting. Denzel Washington, to his credit, I think is giving a very honest performance in the fact that he doesn't make this character likable. He just is what the character is, and you make his own judgments about him. I do not think it's a bad movie. I think it's a very well done movie. It's just a movie that's not to my personal taste. Like a good example of this would be the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is a very good horror film. I think it accomplishes exactly what it's intending to do, but I don't ever really want to watch it again because it's a very, very dark movie that's almost, I think, nihilistic in its tendencies sometimes, even if it does succeed in what it's trying to do. So I can admit that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a really well done horror film. I can admit this is a really well done character-driven drama, but I don't personally feel the need to ever watch it again. I would actually be kind of turned off at the idea of watching it again. But that's my personal taste. That's not necessarily a problem with the movie. One of the problems I had with it, there are locations that go outside the house, which I know is kind of the basis of the stage show, is the house. And it does have locations outside of it. You see the city a little bit, you see other locations, but it is mostly still in the house or outside the house, especially the backyard of the house. And to me, it felt a bit limited in that sense, and it never really felt like, I mean, obviously it's a film, but I don't think it really had that feeling of a film. When you're adapting a play to a movie, you really have to make that change. You have to open it up, or you have to at least somehow make it filmic in certain ways, even if it is a story like 12 Angry Men, which is most of the time, by its very design, has to be in one room. You have to somehow shoot it in a way that it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel claustrophobic, and it feels like you're watching a movie and not just a static show.
In the case of Fences, I feel, and I think it's because, Denzel's directing this, but he's also starring in it. I think that all of these choices to keeping it confined so that you felt like you were watching a cinematic treatment of this great literary work of art. And I think he did a very successful job at doing so, but I can definitely say that at times would have felt limiting. Couldn't they have had this discussion, I don't know, inside the house? Couldn't they have had this discussion, I don't know, walking home from church? You know what I mean? Like, we could have seen more. But I think given budget constraints, the fact that the script doesn't necessarily call for them to go anywhere else, we also have to maybe take into consideration that a play can fly by a lot faster than a film, because it's happening right in front of you in real time, as opposed to using editing technique and anything else that could make time elapse at a pace dictated by the director and editor. But in this case, I think that Denzel sort of kept it pretty much raw I think it was a pretty much a raw adaptation of a script that he clearly is passionate about, that he has already been showered with accolades for his work with. And I think that this was the logical next step, was to make sure that this script is immortalized in cinema. I think he was a 4-star in this one in every sense. I think this was a director's vision, and in this case, it was also the lead actor. And for some reason, I felt he did that very well. I felt it was a sharp, raw adaptation without any frills, without any extra money being thrown around so we could get this killer cameo in the third act to just cement the whole idea that, oh, you got to go see this movie. No, this was a straight up, here's the play script. We already have a screenplay version of it by the original author, and we're going to put this on. It's going to happen. So up next is Hacksaw Ridge, which is Mel Gibson's film about American soldier and combat medic Desmond Doss in World War II, with a focus on the campaign in the Pacific. Desmond is a conscientious objector, which is one who was ready to serve his country, but he was not going to pick up a rifle and kill. And that's why he chose the path of being a medic. The film manages to follow Desmond as a young boy all the way up through his teens, up until even when he enlists and falls in love right before he enlists, but also really makes a strong case for great acting performance, playing a character who had to stick to his convictions from beginning to end and never waver. Andrew Garfield's portrayal of Desmond Doss, who is one of the more interesting figures of World War II that I don't think a lot of, in this case, moviegoers, but a lot of people out there who follow a lot of that history are very well aware of. And the ones who are can't believe the story, but it is true. This is a man who saved dozens of lives and never harmed anyone else throughout the war, and was highly respected by his brothers in arms, but when he first enlisted and went through training was not. So he not only earned it, but proved them wrong in a lot of great ways. It is a brutal film. It is a war film. It has a very human side to it, though. And once it goes into the war phase, which I believe is, pretty much the second half of the film, once it really dives into the battle for Hacksaw Ridge, pitting the United States against the Japanese, an attempt to take and hold type battle, the chaos and the brutality and the violence and the borderline loss of humanity that you see, not just lives, but humanity on that hill, it's pretty visceral. And maybe that's Mel Gibson. He directs violence very well as a director. I did not think that the film was going to spend so much time letting me get to know Desmond Doss. I definitely thought that the first half of the film, you pretty much get to know who Desmond is. And then in the second half of the film, you get to see who Desmond becomes. And that's a horse of a different color in some ways. But at the same time, there's big themes of humanity, faith, conviction, wanting to save rather than take lives. It's got some very solid positive themes, despite the fact that it takes place on a very violent, brutal, and horrific stage.
This film, to be honest, it was the film I was least looking forward to seeing. I don't have a big grudge against Mel Gibson as a filmmaker, but I'm not a big fan of his. And the movie just didn't look terribly interesting to me, or like a movie I would want to see. And part of it is something you kind of suggested. You were surprised by how much the film followed Desmond before he even goes to battle for the first time.
And that's something that the trailers didn't really
No,
put
at
out
all.
there. You thought this was just a war movie, like Saving Private Ryan, except the guy's a medic. That's the vibe the trailers put out there before you walk in.
The trailers kind of are misleading in the fact that it makes it look like it's going to spend 20, maybe 30 minutes on him before he goes to war. Then it's just going to be a war movie for at least an hour and a half or more. So in that sense, it's very surprising. And I think even when it gets into the war aspect of it and the violent wartime stuff, the fighting, the very brutal killings and all that stuff, it remains, for the most part, it remains very focused on character and what Desmond is doing. And I think even the wartime stuff really speaks to that story because it's showing the chaos, the terrible violence, and the kind of inhumanity. It's showing that kind of situation and showing that he's still sticking to his guns and he's still deciding, no, I'm not even going to pick up a gun, let alone shoot it. I'm not going to hurt anybody else. And sometimes that becomes a problem. He almost dies a few times because of this, but he sticks to his guns. And I think
Despite the fact he won't pick them up.
Yeah, exactly. No pun
Yeah.
intended with that.
Yeah, no pun intended. None whatsoever.
The film was a lot more than I thought it was. I thought it was just going to be kind of showcasing kind of violent wartime stuff and be kind of shallow, but I think it is deeper than the trailers might lead you to believe, and it is more character focused than the
Mhm.
trailers lead you to believe. And in a weird sense, it's almost, despite the fact that it's very violent and it can be very dark and very dramatic, it's almost kind of a feel good movie. You walk away feeling very good about this stuff as much as you can after watching a movie where a lot of people are being senselessly killed and all that. You walk away being very positive about the whole thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the film manages to instill hope, even in the darkest of places. And this part of the war was an incredibly dark and brutal place. Yet, this unwavering faith in humanity and hope that everyone that could make it out would make it out. There's an uplifting nature to this film underlying throughout all of that horror. And I think that that is well executed in this film. One critique I do have of it, though, is there's a transition point when it goes from pre war Desmond going into now we're in the war Desmond. There's about a 10 to 15 minute window where it's making this transition, and I really felt like the film lost Desmond for a minute. Then it got right back to him. Then we were with him, but it was like we had this ensemble of characters that we met in basic training and he trained with, and they didn't like him at first, and then he earns their respect. Even when they get there, they still don't totally like him, but they get why he's there and what he's doing. But then all of a sudden, we go back and get to know them again, and I felt a little odd because I was like, this is really about Desmond. I really want to focus on Desmond. Like, the fact you're focusing on Desmond makes me think that Desmond isn't all that important anymore, even though I just spent an hour getting to know who he is and learn his backstory and all these other elements. I'm nitpicking at this point, but if you're talking about this film winning Best Picture, you got to think like this to me was a glaring thing. Like, I noticed it, and maybe it was in the editing room this happened. Maybe this was intended. I have no idea, but I didn't really like the execution if it was intended. It didn't really harm the film on the whole. It was just a glaring thing that midway through the film, I was like, wait a minute, we're not really talking about Desmond anymore. But we're about to go to war, which is like the whole reason that he went through all of these struggles. And oh, wait, now we're back on Desmond. That was kind of how the film felt.
Yeah, I know the moment you're talking about. Did notice it when I was watching that we are kind of going away from Desmond a bit. We see him a bit. He doesn't totally disappear from the film, but we don't see him as much. He's getting noticeably less focused than he was earlier in the film and than he does later in the film. I do think that sequence, it emphasizes certain points about war and the situation he's in. They probably could have shot that in a way that we saw it more from his eyes and that he was responding more to the horrific stuff that was going on. So I think they could have probably done it better, so they could have given context for what he's going through, but without
Right.
losing focus of the main character of the film. One of the problems I have with the movie is that it is very traditional in its storytelling. It's a bit schmaltzy. So in that case, it has a lot of cliches in it. It makes the cliches work very well, but it does have a lot of cliches. It takes it down a few pegs for me, and I can't really place it as high as I would want just because it isn't doing as many different things as a lot of the rest of these movies are. Because
Right.
Fences, it's very different from a lot of other Best Pictures that were nominated previously. Arrival, it's doing a lot of different things. A lot of the other movies we're going to get to a little bit later, they're doing a lot of different things. This one, it's playing it a bit safer. It's still a very enjoyable experience, but
Right.
it's not putting itself out there maybe as much as I would like.
I would agree. There's a safeness to the way the story is constructed. I don't know that it hurts the film itself, but I think it hurts the film in this category.
Not that it's not a good quality film. To be honest, and I don't think any of these films that we're going to talk about are bad films. I think they're all good films. Maybe some I like more and some I like less, but they're all good
Right.
films. This is a good film. It's probably one of the more forgettable films, good or bad.
Sure.
It is one of the more forgettable films amongst this list, probably because of that safeness that we're talking about. But there is a lot to recommend it. Okay, so the next film we're going to talk about is Hell or High Water, which stars Chris Pine, Ben Foster, and Jeff Bridges. Chris Pine and Ben Foster are brothers in, I think it's West Texas, who are robbing different branches of a bank that basically screwed their mother, who has passed away by the start of the film.
Yeah, they're robbing the banks in order to save the ranch. But the banks they're robbing are the banks that double mortgaged everything and put them in this scenario. So they feel righteous in what they're doing.
And Chris Pine's character is a very kind of moralistic character who is really just wants to get this money, pay the stuff off, and then kind of be done with it all. Ben Foster is a bit more of an eccentric character, not very eccentric eccentric, but still eccentric and wild and really kind of crazy and unpredictable. You can tell that he really gets a thrill out of robbing banks and doing things like this and kind of living a fast life, gambling, having sex, all this type of stuff. In the meantime, they're being chased by Jeff Bridges' character, who's a state marshal, I believe, who is
Texas Marshal.
Texas Marshal. He's being forced into retirement, and so this is kind of his last stride, so to speak. And he's a character who is really all about his work and doesn't want to retire, so he's getting kind of the most out of this that he possibly can. So him and his partner, played by an actor whose name I'm totally blanking on at the moment.
Gil Birmingham. The character is half native, half Mexican.
And Jeff Bridges' character makes a lot of jokes about the guy's heritage in ways that are borderline, if not entirely offensive. But you maintain your love for Jeff Bridges' character. I think despite all of that, he remains, I think, a good person, which I think is a testament to Jeff Bridges' performance. And there are a lot of good performances throughout this movie. The four leads, the two law officials and the two brothers, are all played very, very well by their actors. But what did you think about it?
Well, this is one of the films that I tend to lean more towards championing hard for on Oscar Sunday. Not because I think it's going to win Best Picture. It's just, it's one of those films where this plays very much like part heist film, part offbeat comedy, part serious thriller in some ways because the stakes are very high, and at the same time it's a Western, and so it's got all these elements that I just love, and I can't help but be drawn to a film quite like this. And I feel that all the performances are stellar in this. Namely, for me, the two big ones are obviously Jeff Bridges, who is nominated this year for his performance in the Best Supporting Actor category. But the other is Ben Foster, who is just one of those unsung acting heroes of mine, where, like, for the most part, a lot of people don't know who the hell Ben Foster is. But the ones that get to see him get to see an intensity that is borderline unmatched by other actors these days. There's just a level of energy that he brings to every role that he plays that is electric. The way I can easily equate it is there was an electricity and an intensity in Heath Ledger during his portrayal of the Joker that a lot of people just easily recognized. Like, oh man, that was just so good. It was one of the best roles I've ever seen. I've always felt Ben Foster is an actor who brings that same level of intensity to almost every role that he plays. And unlike Heath, who was a phenomenal actor, I'm not denigrating him, but unlike Heath, who had a heartthrob persona before he was considered a real serious, true actor who mastered the craft, Ben has always been that kind of actor. And I think that those types of actors always end up falling in the character role positions, which is fine because I enjoy those performances more in most cases than the leading performers' work. But in this case, this felt like a real ensemble film, despite the fact that there's a dichotomy between those on the right side of the law and those on the wrong side of it. There are similarities between the two pairs. They're juxtaposed brilliantly throughout the film. I think it's one of the better written films this year, and I think it's brilliantly directed, and it's written by Ty Sheridan, who wrote Sicario, and I was a big fan of Sicario. So I mean, the tones and the themes and the way this man writes his narratives and really loves the characters that he's writing, I think shine in a big way. And I know that this was also one of the most critically acclaimed films of the year in terms of the large Rotten Tomatoes pool of critics. It's one of the highest rated films. I know that people who did see it ended up having very positive things to say. The film is this cool outsider compared to most of the others in this category because it's a Western. Now, it is pretty linear in how it's structured, but I feel like it is still pretty non-traditional in some ways. For example, we don't know why the brothers are doing this in the first 10 minutes of the film. We learn it shortly over time, but we also learn that they're what strikes you as two cowpokes who are just robbing banks. It's a lot deeper than that, despite the fact that sometimes it goes off the rails. It was a very planned endeavor, and the marshals who are on their tail are starting to decipher their plan slowly, and there is some true attachment to characters in this film that develops between the audience and the actors portraying them, and I think that that makes the stakes and the outcomes all the better, all the stronger. I don't see it happening, but if I thought there was upset potential, this would be one of the films I think that could pull it off, because I think it was that good. I had feelings of No Country for Old Men when I watched this. I had feelings of Michael Mann films when I watched this. I had feelings of all the best Westerns that I've ever seen. So there's a lot of things going for this film that made me appreciate every ounce of work that went into it. And I've been thinking about it more and more since I watched it for the first time.
You're all right. The characters are very well done, and it's really interesting and fun watching the process of both sets of these characters are doing. All that being said, despite the fact that I do recommend people go and see it, and despite the fact that there's a lot of recommendable things about it, I don't really understand why it's being nominated for Best Picture. It's not a bad film by any means. I was never wowed by the movie, though. If you're going to nominate a film for Best Picture, and I don't care what genre it is, it could be any genre, and I think that's fine, but it has to be a really good film of that genre, of that type. There has to be a wow factor to it. And for me, that wasn't really there. It's definitely a recommendable movie, but I don't think it's Best Picture quality, and I don't think it's as good as some of the ones that are on top of my list. But something that makes this movie stand out from the other nominees around it, it is probably even more than Hacksaw Ridge. It is the most story-driven of all of them. There's still a lot of character stuff in there, but it is the most
Mhm.
story-driven. If there's any kind of theme to this year, I mean, it's two things. One, it's there's a lot of diversity to the types of genres that are in it, to the types of races of the actors who are in these films and the places in society that you're going to. There's a lot of variety there. But if there's another theme, I think, to this year's nominations, is that they're all very character focused and not story focused. And this one stands apart in that way. It is not bad because of that, but it does stand out in the fact that it is very story driven.
I would say that for the reasons that we kind of talked down on Hacksaw Ridge for being traditional narrative A to Z type structure, this film, while it falls into that narrative driven with great character and acting performances within, I think it executes that better. And so it is not susceptible to the critique that we gave Hacksaw Ridge. And I think there's a delineation. And so I think that's just an even bigger reason why I would support it being in this category. But at the same time, I have to face facts. And the facts are, I don't think it has a chance. I think there are other films that are far and away going to get more attention from the Academy in this regard. All right, well, up next we have Hidden Figures, which is about a team of African American women who served as, for lack of a better term, but it was the term at the time, computers at NASA. And they were responsible for doing all of the heavy calculation that helped prepare rockets for launch, for testing, and make sure that if the U.S. was going to send a man into space, they were going to do it and they were going to have all the math right. The film focuses on three particular women from this team, and each one of them has their own particular sort of quest or sort of achievement that they're aching to complete. One of them wants to learn more about coding, another wants to become an engineer, and then finally the lead character, I guess, even though it's more of an ensemble, the lead character is looking to be treated as an equal amongst the upper echelon of engineers at NASA and mathematicians there. So you have a very interesting story that covers three unique lives, three unique approaches to finding a new level of equality in a world where it doesn't exist yet. And this was one of those films that I left the theater feeling very joyous. I wanted to cheer for these women and their struggles, and I wanted to make sure that in the end, as many people that I could let be aware knew about this film and could tell them to go see it. This film is probably the most uplifting in this entire category, and I think for that, its popularity is very well deserved, but at the same time, it's a very well-made film for being an uplifting film. You think of movies that Disney's made, like Remember the Titans, and Remember the Titans is okay. It's very uplifting. It's very inclusive in its themes, and it tackles some harder issues that Disney's not used to really tackling. But then you look at a movie like Hidden Figures, and it hits all of these things head on. And at the same time, it wants to push the audience's love for these characters in all the right ways.
It's a very traditional, inspirational film. Out of all of the Best Picture nominees, it's probably the most accessible. We talked about how Hacksaw Ridge was a bit too traditional in its storytelling and the way it was shot and all that stuff. Hidden Figures is probably that, but more so. Sometimes I wish it tried to do different things and was a bit more experimental and was a bit more different. That being said, this is a very overdue story about not just the three women that are focused on, but all the women who were doing that at that time. And it's something that I didn't even know about. So for me, it was an education. I'm very happy that they are finally doing a story about these women. I think they deserve it. You do exit the film feeling very inspired. There's a shot in the film where Octavia Spencer's character, she's basically the manager of all these quote unquote computer women. There's a shot where they're walking down a hallway to a new job, so to speak. I see that shot and it just inspires me. It tells me, oh yes, we can do this, we can do anything. And that's kind of how the whole film feels. It does deal with racism in certain ways that is a bit tired in certain ways, but it deals with the more casual racism in a refreshing way as well that I really enjoy. This is important to show that even in NASA, you can have casual racism.
One of the things I remember telling somebody immediately after seeing this movie is that, yes, the average depiction of what I would call like a Jim Crow form of racism is present in the film. But the thing that I think the film got right, and I think that the film showcased with great gravitas, was the passive racism that existed. The people who didn't say anything, that just let things happen, that just, oh, that's just the status quo and we're just going to let it go. Not people coming up and saying mean things, not people coming up and trying to keep someone from doing something in a violent way. But when Taraji P. Henson's character enters this room full of white men, and the only woman in the room is a white secretary. She goes to get coffee Thursday. The next day she shows up. They have her own coffee pot sitting there. Nobody told her she had to drink from it. Nobody forced her to drink from it. They just put it there and let it be. And you know that probably one person in the room put it there, but then another 40 plus people didn't do anything about it. And I thought those depictions really said something about how much smarter this film has been in tackling these issues than some of its contemporaries. And I'm not trying to say that those films were bad films or they did it in a bad way. It's just I felt like this film, with its uplifting energy and its battles against different types of racism, it managed to have much more gravitas than some of its contemporaries. And I think that's a big reason why when I walked out of it, I wanted to tell people to go see it. It's kind of like when you see a great musical and you walk out humming a tune. The movie's staying with you when you leave the theater, and Hidden Figures does that in its own unique way. That's why it's in this category, because I did walk out having really big thoughts about it. You are absolutely right about this being a story that had to be told. In fact, I remember hearing about this classification of women, the computer, which were female human calculators, basically. But I didn't have any kind of key story that told their story. And so this film, I walked out, and rather than wanting to sing the tune, I wanted to go read more. I wanted to hear more. I wanted to know more about the women who did this. I don't know of anybody who saw this film and didn't feel a need or a want to cheer on these three main women, Taraji P. Henson, Octavia Spencer, and Janelle Monáe's characters. But the performances alone were good. I was all in supporting them. Octavia is nominated again for an Oscar. Janelle Monáe, I thought, was sort of a real breakout performer in the last year in terms of cinema, because she's also in Moonlight, which is in this category. But then Taraji P. Henson is a real presence on camera. And I found myself drawn to her as an audience member, and I always wanted to know what she was up to. So if that's your three leads, you got a dynamite movie on your hands.
I don't know how memorable it is. Since it is a more traditional film, I think it's going to be easier for this film, whether it deserves it or not. I think it's going to be easier for it to fade into the background a little bit more than something like an Arrival or like a Moonlight, which, whether they're better films or not, they stand out more, I think. Okay, so let's move on to La La Land. It's done by the same writer and director who did Whiplash.
Damien Chazelle.
It is a musical about a woman played by Emma Stone and a guy played by Ryan Gosling. Emma Stone's character is a struggling actress in Hollywood who, try as she might, she just can't seem to. If she's getting gigs, they're not really great gigs, and she just feels very underrespected in her field when she goes to auditions, and she's just really not happy with how things are going in her life. And then at one point she runs into a jazz pianist played by Ryan Gosling, who is kind of in a similar boat of not being terribly satisfied with his life. He has this job at this restaurant playing the piano where he can't really play the music he wants. He just plays what other people want. And it's not really terribly satisfying for him as an artist. And what he really wants to do is get enough money to buy a building and start his own jazz club. And he's very pure about that idea. He's not doing it for the money. He's doing it really just because he loves the type of music. He's very much an artist, if you want to use that term. And the movie's kind of about dreams. It's about the relationship between these two characters. They get into a romantic relationship. It's just about these two people kind of trying to reach their goals and problems that lie ahead for them in terms of the logistics of doing these things, and also just in terms of the emotional problems that can come about from trying to reach your dream. So this is the one that's expected to win the Best Picture award. I'm of two minds about that. I was very happy when I heard this film was a musical and that it was being very highly acclaimed, and then I learned it was be nominated for Best Picture. I was very happy about that because, well, one, musicals aren't made very much anymore. We've seen some bigger ones lately, like Sweeney Todd, like Les Mis. Les Mis got nominated for an Oscar as well. Didn't win, but it got nominated at least. So yeah, they're not made very much anymore. The last musical to win Best Picture was Chicago in 2002, and before that, one hadn't won since Oliver in 1968 or 69. So they're not very common anymore to win. So I was happy to see a musical in that position where it has a very high chance of winning. So in that sense, I was almost pulling for it. After watching the film and then watching the other films in this category, even though it's probably likely to win, I don't know if I want it to win. It is an original musical, which is good. It's not based off of anything. It's totally original screenplay. It's original songs. But I don't think it's quite good enough to really deserve this award. For one, the songs are a bit of a problem. They're not the most memorable songs. Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are not the best singers in the world. They are a bit weak in certain cases. But what are your thoughts about it?
I kind of go back and forth about this one too. I mean, when I saw it, my initial response was very positive. I'm a big fan of both Gosling and Stone. I think their chemistry is good. I saw a few people sniping that they didn't feel these two had any click. I would disagree with that. For me, the big win here is really in the direction. Chazelle, he won me over with Whiplash. He showed me that he can direct truly great acting performances while still maintaining a strong sense of mise-en-scène. And to be honest with you, that's the thing that makes this movie scream a Best Picture nominee, because it goes from reality to fantasy, and then you kind of realize that the whole thing is fantasy, and it does it pretty flawlessly. I can hear the complaints with regards to the music not being the most memorable. I mean, there's only a couple of tunes out of this that I truly remember, like right now sitting here, and they aren't ones that I'm going to hum or sing along to or anything like that. I like them. They're good, but it's not like when you watch a movie like Les Mis and you know you want to sing along, or like if they made a better version of Phantom of the Opera, you're going to want to sing along. Things like that are not present here, but then again, this has no theatrical roots. So for a standard to hold it up to, I can see the complaints. I can agree with them to a large extent. I think these two, though, as singers, they are perfectly fine in the roles that they're in, and they manage to keep the film focused on them, so there aren't 3 or 4 other singers that completely blow us away, and then we're like, man, Gosling and Stone are garbage. Like, there's none of that. It sticks with them the whole time. The film's stayed true to itself from start to finish. So regardless of whether or not you're all in on the anti-LA Love Fest hype that kind of preceded this film, or if you're not really into loving the music, that's totally fine. It's just not your bag. It wasn't really my bag, to be quite honest with you. But I did feel that from start to finish, this film made a strong impression with the one take opening song. And then as it unfolded and it focused on these two characters, it found itself, it stayed true to itself, and by the end of it, when credits roll, it was a satisfying experience. Now, do I think it could win Best Picture? Because this is the one that everybody says has all the momentum. I mean, it did just win the Directors Guild of America award. Chazelle's not empty-handed this season. Emma Stone won a Golden Globe. Did Gosling win the Golden Globe? I think he did, or
Yes,
he was nominated. I know that.
I'm like 90 something % sure he did.
So this film's already raking in the awards. So coming into Oscar Sunday, it has the highest level of momentum. But, and this is where my predictions come in, and I could be very much wrong. Do I think this film will win Best Picture? Yes. What is my gut telling me right now? My gut is telling me that Chazelle is going to win Best Director. And so the film is not going to leave empty-handed. It's probably going to take Best Cinematography. It's a good category this year, it really is. But I think that this one is far and away on everybody's mind. And I think if you were looking at how it shoots, the difference between the reality that these two characters live in on a daily basis, and then the fantasy elements of when it turns into song and dance numbers, the visuals are so stunning that it's hard not to put this one at the top of the list when you break down those 5 nominees in that category. I also think, though, that there might, if there's going to be a quote-unquote upset in this category, Moonlight is going to beat this film. Because even with all the momentum that this film has had going in, if there was going to be a film that beats it, no one is going to discount how strong and important a film like Moonlight is amongst this field of nominees. I mean, in the end, I'm looking at this whole list and thinking Moonlight is the film that was made for the least amount of money. It's produced by A24, which, if you aren't familiar with A24, they have a pretty stellar record. They're almost like Pixar level perfect in the way they select their scripts and produce their films. And it's one of those things where, while we're talking about this movie, La La Land, I just can't pull the rug out from underneath Moonlight, and I think Moonlight might be the one that pulls the rug out from underneath La La Land. Best Picture category with these 9 nominees, which we talked about earlier in this podcast, is a bit different. If there were 5 nominees and La La Land was up against Moonlight, and that, let's say maybe Manchester by the Sea, Hidden Figures, and Hacksaw Ridge, let's say that was the field, I would say La La Land's going to win it, no problem. But I think when you have all of these films that the Academy has to see, and you have La La Land, which is the one that takes place in LA and Hollywood, and so automatically going for it. But this could be the year of upsets in some categories. And if that were the case, I could see this movie not winning Best Picture, but not going home empty-handed. We could probably sit here and talk for ages about how, yes, it's one of the best shot films of the year. It's very well directed. It's very well acted. It's pretty well sung. The music is good, but the songs, the ancillary music, the jazz music is great. The actual songs themselves, not as great as the jazz, that kind of thing. So you might question, like, was the film really true to itself? Because, like, the best parts of it weren't emphasized more over the ancillary elements. I don't know.
In terms of this winning Best Picture, yes, I agree that it is probably going to win. If anything beats it, it is probably going to be Moonlight, or I think Manchester has a bit of a chance as well, because both of those films have been very highly hailed. They've been nominated for a lot of awards. They're getting a lot of good press. So I think those are really the top three most likely to do this.
Up next is the film Lion, which stars Dev Patel. And Lion is about a young boy in one of the poorer villages in India. He's very young, and he has a slightly older brother who goes to work overnight. And one night he convinces his older brother to let him go with him. Well, bit of a big mistake, because he ends up accidentally taking a journey 1,600 kilometers away from his village. And if you're not familiar with how India works, there are multiple languages spoken there. And where he arrives, he doesn't speak the language. And when he finally meets a few people who do speak the language and can understand him, he doesn't actually know how to properly pronounce his village's name. And so he is stranded as an orphan in a foreign land, even though it's in his own country. And so he ends up getting adopted and raised by an Australian couple. And it changes his life forever. But then later he realizes that there's a life he left behind, and he wants to try to track it down. And so, commanding performance from Dev Patel, who, if you're not familiar with, he was in Slumdog Millionaire, which won Best Picture, and he was a regular on HBO's The Newsroom. He's been in several things here and there. He is a fine actor. This is a great vehicle for him. But it also stars Nicole Kidman and David Wenham, who, you say Nicole Kidman and you know exactly who we're talking about. This is one of the films that I feel is a little bit more unsung in this category. It was a film whose title I was hearing quite a bit of when the nominees were named, but not one that a lot of people I knew had gone out and seen. And so it falls into that category of one of the lesser known entities in this category. I might have said that Dev Patel was nominated for Best Actor. He's actually Best Supporting Actor, because he splits the role of the character of Saru with a young boy. The young boy is actually quite good as well, and his name is Sunny Pawar. And I'm probably mispronouncing that because I don't know how to properly pronounce some of these names, but I want to make sure that if you haven't heard of Lion or you have heard of Lion, start to get to know some of these names, because I think you're going to see them much more often. This is one of those films that relies heavily on its actors and their portrayals. It has a good story, but it's one of those things where the magnetism in the film came from the performances.
While I wouldn't quite say the first half of this film and the second half of this film feel like totally different movies, they almost do, because they are very different. Because the first half is really about this young kid who's lost, and he's going from place to place a little bit. He's in very bad areas of the country. I saw somebody describe it as kind of almost Dickensian in its manner. And then you switch to this young 20-something guy who's trying to find his home. And the act structure of it was a bit weird to me. And it has a first act, and it has a third act, but I don't know if it really has a second act, and it just felt a bit disjointed in some ways.
Kind of like how we did with Hacksaw Ridge. If you're going to pick the film apart, this is where it lacks the weight of the rest of the elements of the film. I thought the opening, the Dickensian element was very strong, and I was pulling for the little guy, and I wanted him to be safe, and I wanted him to maybe find his home, but that never came. Once he's adopted and you get into this almost immediate, here's the young boy, and now he's grown up. It felt a little jarring. I can agree with that. I think that the flashbacks helped keep it grounded in its narrative, but at the same time, I think that the film, on a script level, it doesn't hold up like its contemporaries in the category. And so it sort of falls off. Does the payoff feel right? Yes, the payoff feels right. But then there's this gray area. He's going to commit to finding his village, and it really does consume him in every way. He doesn't want to continue a relationship he's in. He doesn't want to really deal with his adoptive parents. He doesn't want to deal with anything. He wants to focus only on this. But then after a while, you're kind of like, none of these people are keeping you from doing this. So why are you becoming so difficult to be around? Maybe they would help you? And even one of the other characters asks that question and he gets defensive. It felt like a teen angst as opposed to a man in his mid to late 20s. And it isn't bad acting on Dev Patel's part. It's the way he was directed and the vision of the film. But I feel like it's kind of a misfire. It felt like I was watching a teen angst film for about 15 to 20 minutes in the middle of the search.
One thing I will give this film, because I do think it has a lot of flaws in it, it is the only film out of these 9 that we're talking about that made me cry. It made me cry actually multiple times near the last 15, maybe 20 minutes or so. It's very touching, and I think in that sense it works very well.
And I hope that the strong performances in the film are not something that are easily forgotten. And I think that the performances are a big reason why you had that emotional response to the film. The young man who plays the young Saru is probably one of the finest child actors I've seen in a long time. I think that Dev Patel's performance is, you can embrace it very easily. And I know I made the teen angst comment, but like I don't feel that it was lacking in sincerity, that truth factor. And so I think that it was easy to really fall in love with characters in this, even if the film and its structure and some of its execution were flawed at times. But I don't want that to take anything away from a great performance. Can't do that. So I would agree with you completely.
Okay, so let's move on to Manchester by the Sea. It is about a guy played by Casey Affleck who is living
in Boston or near Boston.
Anyway, in that kind of area, and he's working as a handyman for 3 apartment complexes. And it starts off with him doing his thing, doing his job, but you can tell he's really not very happy. Not in a I'm not really happy where my life is going, but in a I'm seriously depressed way.
Yeah, to the point of being misanthropic. He doesn't like being around people. He doesn't like interacting with people, and he has no patience.
Gets a call from his family in Manchester that his brother has passed away. So he travels over there to organize the funeral and take care of all that planning stuff because his brother's wife is no longer in the picture. And while I think it's the reading of the will is taken care of, he learns that his brother wants him to take care of his nephew. And Casey Affleck is not fine with this idea, and he's trying to think of a way to not do that. That's just not what he wants to do. He's a temporary person. He's not a long-term taking care of a kid type of person. So he's grappling with that. He's grappling with organizing all this stuff. His nephew is trying to handle the fact that his father has passed away. At the same time, somebody from his past comes back into his life who he has not seen in a long time, and he has to deal with that. And at the same time, Casey Affleck is dealing with the reason for why he is so depressed and so unhappy with life. He's dealing with those problems from his past. He's dealing with certain issues to do with his ex-wife, played by Michelle Williams. And that's basically the film. Again, it's not a terribly plot-heavy film. It is really all about character. One thing I was surprised about this film was that while it is certainly a drama, I don't want to make people think that it's anything but a drama, it is actually kind of funny in certain instances. It's not funny in a Bill Murray, Eddie Murphy, obvious comedy sort of way. It's not that type of funny, but in a very kind of real world, the kind of stuff that even during tragic times like this, the kind of humor that can come out in life. In the first few minutes of the film, I actually chuckled a bit, which is not something I was expecting to do in this film.
I've seen many films like this. I wouldn't say they were as good as this, but I've seen films like this at Ebertfest. They're these character-driven, beautifully acted pieces that they have a story. I wouldn't say that it's even secondary. It's just it really relies heavily on great acting. And the thing with Casey Affleck's character is that he comes off as depressive. He comes off as socially awkward. He comes off as someone who's carrying a great weight. And you don't really know what that weight is. Eventually, you get a sense of it. You have to watch the film to know. I will not spoil it here, but there's a monologue that he delivers. It's the whole reason he's in the Best Actor category. Hands down. His work in this film is extraordinary. It truly is. He's a great actor. He just shows it throughout. But there's one scene where this is the award-winning moment of the film. It puts him in the upper deck of acting performances throughout the year, unquestionably. The struggles of these characters are very real, and up until a certain point, you don't quite know what Casey Affleck's deal is. You almost think he's just an asshole, and that's it. But there's way more to him and that character than meets the eye. And so watching the whole film is rewarding because you get to see who this man is, why he is the way he is, what he was like before he goes down this path of being this type of person, because he wasn't always like this. And it's a sad film in a lot lot of ways, but it's also bittersweet. It's the bittersweet movie of the year, and I think that it is definitely a potential top 3 contender for Best Picture.
Casey Affleck's performance, for the most part, is a very reserved performance. The character often talks very quietly and unemotionally, and that is something that could very easily become one note and dull quite quickly, but he keeps it interesting. And I loved following this character around. I could follow him around even longer. It's a very good performance. It's getting hailed a lot, but I think it should get even more credit than it's due, because he's doing a lot of subtle things that are not terribly showy.
It's almost as if his performance puts him in the category of, if you're a young aspiring actor and you want to know what it's like to be on the full spectrum in a performance, the full spectrum of emotion, happy, joyous, even foolish at times, all the way down to the darkest depths of your humanity where you're sad and you want to be disconnected from the world and all of these things. He is like a textbook case of how to convey all of these emotions in one package. And I think that that's why it's a very deserving nomination for him for Best Actor. It doesn't necessarily just carry the film, because Kenneth Lonergan's direction here is very on point. This film, much like La La Land, I said how it was very true to itself from start to finish. This film falls into that category as well, albeit a very different type of story, very different characters. It's not trying to lift you up in any way. It's not trying to take you to the land of fantasy. It's trying to keep you grounded in what could otherwise be considered a brutal reality for many people out there. And it's realistic. The reality is realistic.
It's realistic in terms of characters, in terms of its story, in terms of its tone, in terms of its dialogue. But one thing I found that really kind of helped the reality of the film, I don't know if this will make any sense at all, but was its sound design. I wish this got nominated for some sort of sound award, because the sound really helps it. It adds everyday things that I'd never have seen in a film before, and that makes it more real to me. The best example I can give is at one point Casey Affleck is in his brother's house and he's making food, and you actually hear the sounds of a microwave. It's a very everyday sound that just makes it feel much more real. It's almost like the flush of a toilet. It's a sound of humanity almost to me.
I would agree. I think the technical term is diegetic sound. It's sound in the room. It feels very natural. It feels very not produced. It feels captured. And the other thing too, the score for the film, the music isn't a bunch of manufactured stuff. There's some eeriness to some of the music in the film. It feels like you're listening to arias as opposed to just symphonic compositions. It's hard to explain because I don't want to ruin too much, because it really helps anchor down the tone of the film. And that's why it's such a great touch. Yeah, it won't be nominated for best score, all right, but it's definitely using music that suits the tone of the film throughout and keeps it anchored in this nonlinear reality where we're going between his character's past and his present. And I know that a lot of the scenes too, just to go back to the performances for one moment, I would love to read the script for this film. And I say that because when you watch the sequences with the nephew and the uncle, or anytime two characters are arguing, it's almost like David Mamet rapid fire dialogue. How much of it was improvised and how much of it was to the letter? That kind of question, because they were talking over each other and they felt like real arguments between people, and emotions were getting the better of people in some scenes. And there's just parts of that you don't see that in movies, because movies want to spell everything out for you in a certain way and say something important. But what's happening in those scenes is that they're saying something important without even being able to understand half the time what people are saying, because it's emotionally driven acting, as opposed to, okay, I have to say these words so that the audience gets where we're going in the story. Like, this is a very tone-oriented film. Okay, and the last nominee is Moonlight, which is one of the most talked about films of the year. And it follows a young black man in a tougher African-American community than we see in any of these other films. It is set more modern day, probably within the last 15 years or so. It's about a young man who is bullied, who is poor, who shows no signs of having a lack of intelligence or anything, but he's very quiet and reserved and trying to just be himself. But anytime you see him, he's struggling with something. This is a film that is being heralded for how important it is, because it touches on extreme poverty. It touches on the struggle of a young black man to live in a black community that in many cases rejects him. It deals with drug addiction, sexuality. It touches on all of these heavy, heavy subjects that from start to finish, I don't want to say you're left out of breath or you feel like it's too heavy. It's magnetic in the way that the story is woven together. And I think that's the key reason why it's considered one of the best films of the year, because one, it's beautifully acted. Two actors play the lead character, known as Little. Well, three technically. Actually, you're right, because it's three phases of his life. You have him when he's very little, you have him when he's in his teen years, and then you have him as a full-fledged adult. The people who have an impact on his life. His mother is played by Naomi Harris. I've always been a Naomi Harris fan. I'm glad she got a role like this to really sink her teeth into, because she plays a single mother who's trying her best to provide, but she's also a drug addict and becomes very hard to deal with if you're a young boy who, for the most part, doesn't misbehave. He's a perfectly well-behaved young kid. And then you have the sort of, wouldn't say the word adoptive, but he sort of becomes like a surrogate father figure. Mahershala Ali's performance in this, he's nominated for Best Supporting Actor. This guy is a phenomenal actor. And this is one of those roles where he makes a very strong impression in the first 30 seconds you see him. The weight and gravity that his character brings to the film, and then the positive influence that he tries to put into Little's life. When you show him that the world isn't just totally out to get him. And then, of course, there's my breakout performer of the year, Janelle Monáe, who has a much smaller role than I had anticipated, but a positive one. Positive female role model that he can look to, he can ask for help from, he can rely upon when things get really bad. It's one of those films that by the time you're done watching it, you do feel a little out of breath. It was a lot. It was heavy, but you're impacted. And that's why it's in this category, because much like previously mentioned films, is true to itself from start to finish. It has some very beautiful photography, some of the best of the year. It's edited very well, I think. The direction of this is ambitious. I feel ambition behind this director's choices, and it's tackling subjects that typically are not talked about, or maybe they're depicted, but they're not necessarily mainstays. It tries to tackle hard subjects in raw ways.
You mentioned the editing is really good. I agree. Since this is tackling three different phases of this guy's life, it weaves those together very well. Because, I mean, it's spanning a probably 15, 20 year or more period.
15 to 20, easily.
Yeah. But it doesn't ever feel like they're trying to handle more of his life than they can really do in a 2 hour or so movie. They piece it together very, very well. If any film I think deserves the best editing award, it is that one. In terms of the cinematography and directing, this is a very ambitious film. It is also, I think, out of all of these that have been nominated, is the biggest standout. Just in terms of the way it looks from the beginning of the movie, it looks totally unlike any of the other films. So there is a lot of ambition to do something different, and to also talk about areas of life that maybe have been neglected. So in that sense, I really admire it for that. It is a very interesting film and how it deals with all of that, and how it deals with sexuality, how it deals with growing up, and how it deals with living in these types of situations with this type of income. But while the film, I think, is very interesting, it was not one of the more enjoyable ones for me. I admire it tremendously for what it's doing. I would not be surprised at all if it does win, but like Fences, it maybe isn't entirely my type of film.
I'm always on the lookout, and I think it's because I just gravitate toward a lot of films that show me things I don't see on a daily basis. Like La La Land, while I enjoyed it very much, and I totally understand why it's as popular as it is, it falls into a category of stuff I easily relate to. Moonlight does not. I don't know what it's like to grow up in those environments. I don't know what it's like to run from bullies and have to hide in an abandoned apartment that, for all we know, was a crack house 3 weeks earlier. I don't know what that's like. There's a grittiness to this film that drew me in because it was very brutal and honest. And sometimes I'm not easily ready or looking forward to watching films like this. But when I finally sat down to watch Moonlight and I started it, I couldn't look away. And that says a lot about how good the film is. I was so intrigued because, and not to take anything away from the film, it didn't feel like Boys in the Hood, where like the camera followed these characters in the story and we dealt with their tragedies with them and things like that. This is a film that is very artistic in its raw delivery of a very tough narrative. So heralding it for its ambition, for its artistic expression, for its beautiful performances, for its story that is unconventional given its setting. All opinions aside, I think this is one of the films that if you were going to have an upset win, this would be the one to take the award. Mainly just because of how raw and brutal and, the wrong word, but the tone of the word sounds right. Expressionistic, how well it artistically expressed its views and its story and everything. It definitely sticks with its audience after they see it. And it's hard to ignore how very well executed this particular story was.
Okay, so that about wraps up all the Best Picture nominees. So Blake, how would you rank these overall?
So if we were doing personal rankings of these nominees, And this has nothing to do with the Academy's going to do, nothing that I think other people or critics or anything. This is just how I would rank them. Number 9 on my list is Lion because it's a very character-driven film. And while it's a beautiful film, I think it doesn't hold up when you stack it against some of the other nominees in this category. Number 8, it's tough for me to do this because I really enjoyed the film, but Arrival, I think aside from some good performances but a great script, the film doesn't, again, stack up against where I'm going in my list. Then next is Hidden Figures, which I sang complete praises of, and I was totally in love with, and I still am. But there's an element to this that's unique amongst its contemporaries in this category, but I just don't see it in the top 4 or 5. Next is Hacksaw Ridge, because while I did drag it through the coals when it came to that 15-minute window of narrative misfire, the rest of the film was on point. I felt like it was a great human piece, or human interest piece from the war that is not more commonly told. Good film, but it's got to be number 6 on the list when I get into the top 5. So up next is Fences. It's middle of my pack for a lot of reasons. One, I love how Denzel directed this adaptation. I think it's a very faithful adaptation of one of the best works of theater. His performance and Viola's performance are so damn good that I would love for the both of them to win Best Actor and Best Supporting Actress respectively. But the film itself feels very contained, and we talked at length about that. It feels very contained in its environments. It doesn't really branch out or feel anything outside of just very character-driven dialogue. Number 4 for me personally is La La Land. I enjoyed La La Land. I know it has a lot of momentum going into the awards. I know it's probably going to take Best Picture this year, but for me, I love the characters. I enjoyed the music. I loved the jazz infusion. I loved the images. I love the cinematography. I think it's almost a lock for cinematography, although there could be some rug pulling. And the direction of the movie is excellent, and the writing is pretty damn good too. I didn't feel like I was watching a romantic comedy. I felt like I was watching a relationship film, but it's still, I don't think it beats the top 3 on my list. And that would be number 3, Hell or High Water. Jeff Bridges is on point in this. Gil Birmingham is an amazing scene partner for him, whose performance I think is going a little unsung. But Chris Pine and Ben Foster, what a duo. This is a Western heist film that the people committing the heist have a righteous motive, and that's a hook. It's a really good narrative hook. But yeah, it's got to be number 3 on the list due to the final 2. And I think you can see where this is going. Number 2 is going to be Manchester by the Sea. Brilliant performance by Casey Affleck. I love the direction by Kenneth Lonergan. I think the story is very character driven, but done in a great nonlinear way. I feel like when we start peeling back the layers of who these characters are and how they became who they are in that present day setting, it's a heavy, heavy weight that they're carrying. And when they hand it off to you, the audience member, it feels very natural and also impacting in a huge way. I can't say enough good things about Manchester, and it was a film that I actually thought I wasn't going to really like before I watched it, and then it ended up being one of my favorites of the year. And then my number 1 movie is Moonlight. It showed me a side of the world I don't see on a daily basis. It had brutally raw performances from 3 great actors playing the same part. It had awesome supporting character work. It had a story that tackled all of these things that are very prominent subjects in our sociopolitical climate right now. Drug addiction, sexuality, poverty, you name it, it's in there. And to be quite honest with you, the beauty and the artistic expression on display in this film make it impossible for me to ignore it. At the same time, in the end, when I think back to all these films, Moonlight was the one that's probably sticking with me the most.
Just to give kind of a bit of a disclaimer on this one, I tended to rank films higher if the fact that I enjoyed them more tended to make them go up higher than if it was more objectively more original film or a better film. So at the bottom of my list, and this will probably come to no surprise, is Fences. As already stated, it's a very good film, but not really to my liking. Out of all of the Best Picture nominees, it's probably the only one I really don't feel like watching again. It's very strong performances from its 2 leads. It's very true to life, but not for me personally. My next up is Lion. Despite the fact that it's a very touching film and a well-acted film, it does have big script problems and some structure problems that kind of hurt it in a significant way, and that kind of is the main reason why it is so far down on my list. The next one is actually number 6 because we have a tie between Moonlight and Hell or High Water. Moonlight, again, it's a very interesting film to me, and it does grab you, and by the end of it you are really hooked on it, but I did not love the film. Hell or High Water, it is a very engaging crime drama western film. It doesn't stand out as some of the other ones that are higher on my list. My next up for me is Hacksaw Ridge. This film was very surprising to me. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I was tempted to rank this higher. The reason I didn't was while I very much enjoyed it, I enjoyed learning about a guy who I had knew nothing about. I enjoyed the storytelling, I enjoyed the actors. It is maybe a bit too safe in its storytelling. So in that sense, because it was a bit more safe than I would like, I did put it lower because I wish it was a bit more ambitious in certain senses. The next up is La La Land. It does have some handicaps. The songs are terribly memorable. In some senses, while I think they do a good job, Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling, to me anyway, could be a bit better vocally, but it has great direction. It has some great writing. Acting wise, Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling do a bang up job with it. And while I very much would like to see a musical win again, I don't know if this is the right one. Number 3 is Hidden Figures. It took way too long for their story to be told, and I'm very happy that not only that it is being told, but that it was told so well and in such a uplifting and positive but also original way. Next up for me is Arrival, which I think is probably one of the best, most original, most thoughtful, most well written and well acted and constructed sci-fi films, and really just films in general that I've seen in a long, long time. And the top for me, and this probably won't come as a surprise either, is Manchester by the Sea. I loved the reality of it. I loved the honesty of it. I loved how true to life it was. I loved the performances. I loved the direction. It's not as obviously unique as your top pick, Moonlight, but it is something that if you can check it out, I would definitely recommend that you go see it. But I would love for Manchester to win.
It would be a surprise. I think it would be a good one. If you think about it, like the Oscars have this weird dynamic where they want to give awards to a fair amount of films. We don't really see the sweeps like we did when, say, Titanic won quite a few Oscars or anything like that. But right now, momentum is shifting toward La La Land, but I still think there's room for an upset. And I think that that upset could fall between Manchester by the Sea or Moonlight. And I think Manchester, in the end, if it won, that would be an incredibly fitting Best Picture winner. I still think Moonlight could be a very fitting Best Picture winner. But at the same time, I wouldn't disagree with you that I think Manchester could pull this out. I'm going to be interested to see how this category actually shakes out, but I think you're right. I think there could be an upset, and if there is, Manchester winning would be outstanding.
Before we wrap things up here, I did ask you for a previous Best Picture winner or nominee that you thought was unsung or underappreciated or just something you would want to draw more attention to. What film was that?
Oh, for me, it's The Hustler. 1961, Robert Rosen's masterpiece, The Hustler. This was a film that it did win 2 Oscars. It won Best Cinematography in black and white because back then they had 2 categories. They did black and white and they did in color. And it also won Best Set Decoration in black and white. But there's a lot of nominations here that were not wins that I think very much could and should have been. And this was nominated in 62. Best Picture for Robert Rosen because he produced and directed this film himself. He was also nominated for Best Director, Best Actor Paul Newman, Best Actress Piper Laurie, who, by the way, many people only know her from playing Carrie's mom in Carrie, and she was scary in that, but she was very, very good in The Hustler. And then Best Supporting Actor Jackie Gleason, and this is actually one of the few films that I've always found interesting because it has 2 Best Supporting Actor nominations. George C. Scott was also nominated, but he refused to be nominated. This is a film that thrives on its characters and its actors, and the pool element, the really cool billiard hall element just has always been a draw for me. This is a film that also has a really compelling story. It is pretty traditional in that it follows one key character, but he has interactions with all of these other characters. And it's about a guy who is a pool hustler who has to make his money grifting town to town, being so good at pool that he can take people for money. And when he is at the height of his game, he gets punished for it. And in the end, it's a quest in a way. And those are the types of films and stories that are very easy to be drawn into because it's all about him being able to beat the best of all time, which is the character based on a real pool shark called Minnesota Fats, played by Jackie Gleason, who did all of his own pool shots in the movie. And Paul Newman did all but one pool shot in the film. So these are actors learning a craft. These are actors portraying great characters, doing everything actually on camera. I've just been so enamored with this film, and I revisit it probably once a year, every year. It's number 4 on my all-time top 5 list, and it actually fluctuates. It kind of jumps down after I watch it to probably like number 2, maybe number 1. It is on Netflix. You can stream it right now. But yeah, The Hustler, man. I think you can tell I'm all jazzed talking about it, like more so than some of the Best Picture nominees this year. But this is one of those films that I kind of discovered on my own. Nobody recommended this to me. I saw it on some list randomly at the University of Illinois undergrad library for their best films or whatever, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. I'll check it out. And then I ended up just completely falling in love with it.
The beginning of the film, it spends about 40 odd minutes or so on the first face-off between Paul Newman's character and Jackie Gleason's, but I could watch them play pool forever. It's shot in such an engaging way that I could just keep watching it and watching it and watching it and watching it and watching it, and it totally grabs you in and just makes you want to keep watching this. And for people who don't know, this is not a movie about pool. Pool is in it, but it's not really about pool, I would
Correct.
say.
And this is why it's a masterpiece. This is why it's a masterpiece piece of cinema. Go ahead.
It's more about the characters and all that stuff. It's not really about the game itself, even though it is very prominently featured in the movie. Another thing I would like to give a shout out to, and you kind of hinted at it, George C. Scott is wonderful in this movie. I don't know if he's ever done anything that's not just true and honest. From every line delivery, every performance choice, even when he's acting like a total asshole, it's a total joy to watch him on screen.
And he is very good in everything. He is one of the few actors that when you watch everything they've ever done, in every single production, good or bad, he brings 100% every time. And in this particular film, he's a bad dude, and not a traditionally bad dude. I mean, he drinks milk, for God's sake. Everybody else is drinking booze. He drinks milk. He doesn't. He's like a purist in a lot of ways. Very principled character. So it's one of those things where the character dynamics, when you look at it, and yes, Pool, the hustler, is about a pool hustler, but it's not all about pool. The character dynamics feel like you're watching a play, a really good play. And that's why that near 40-minute sequence with Paul Newman, Jackie Gleason, George C. Scott going through this opening element of the film to sort of establish who these guys all are and what this lifestyle, this hustler lifestyle is like. It's gripping. It's gripping as opposed to just being a couple of dudes shooting pool. If you're listening to this and you've been hearing us talk about movies constantly for the last however many hours this has gone on, The Hustler is one of those films that I always feel is never on anybody's list, but it should be. Isn't watched by enough people, but it should be. And if you ever want to watch and study acting, this is a great movie to watch. It's spellbinding. If I'm going to use a term Roger Ebert would have used, it's spellbinding. Gobsmacking would be another good one.
Okay, so I just want to thank my guests again for being with me today. I do appreciate that, Blake.
Very well. Thanks for having me, man. This was a pleasure.
And for all of you listening, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the Oscar festivities that are happening soon. And I hope you will join me next month, where the topic is going to be Humphrey Bogart. And I hope you come and join me for that. So I will see you then. You can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat. Links to my WordPress and YouTube account, where you can find film and television news and reviews, can be found in the episode's description.